Welcome to the Luke Jaeger Show. I am here today with special guest Tim Smolens, musician and composer, most known for his bands Stratosphere, currently with High Castle Teleorchestra, Dawn Salsa, and many other projects he's done. How you doing, Tim?
Good, man. Thanks for having me on. Nice weather today in the fall. Everything's good.
Are you you're in Denver now?
Yeah, that's correct.
Oh, awesome, yeah. Okay, so I guess we'll start off kind of with your history. I mean, you're a really profound musician. Are you mostly bass playing, vocals, I take it?
It's kind of a weird thing. I definitely I started on guitar like back in the the late '80s glam metal thing. Then when Nirvana came, I was too young to really know to hold your ground. So like it wasn't cool to like shred a guitar anymore. You may have. I'm not. How old are you? Sorry.
Oh, I'm almost 40.
So I'm like 44, but maybe that was a couple of years. But it was like when Nirvana came, it was like not cool to play guitar well anymore. So like I switched to bass then because I was in 10th grade or 9th grade or something, and then I just kind of stuck with that. But over the years, I would say the production has always pulled me away from like really becoming an accomplished instrumentalist. Like primarily like I can do it and I can sort of fake it and make myself do all these styles, and I can play jazz and all this stuff, and I can play some cello, some guitar, some piano, and I play like tons of the instruments, but like by far the most time is me and the computer and all the production stuff that goes along with it. But to answer your question, bass is sort of primary.
Yeah. And was that your first instrument, so to speak?
The guitar was. So I started
Okay.
at like 9 after seeing La Bamba. That was it.
Right. I kind of remember that, but I want to hear you say it. I
Yeah,
love
and
that movie. Yeah.
it was kind of funny because like right after that, it's like I probably went into rock and roll and like the hard metal of the day. But there was that like 50s thing that was like growing inside me from La Bamba. I remember there's that airplane crash scene in there when they play Sleepwalk by Johnny and Santo. And that always stuck with me, that like 50s ballad vibe. And
Yeah.
sort of, emerged like years and years later where I started getting way into like doo-wop and Beach Boys stuff. So
Right. Were you did you take lessons growing up?
yeah, started
Okay.
my started with like guitar lessons and stuff. Definitely took those for a couple years, although I would say that most of what I do is self-taught over the years. I did take some like jazz arranging classes, but most of what I actually use is just like stuff I've studied obsessively, whether it's like Beach Boys harmonies or like Morricone production style, whatever it is. I like really kind of dive into it obsessively, and everyone around me gets like super annoyed because it's like 2 or 3 years of me just like doing one thing. But so
Yeah. Did you grow up in Santa Cruz?
no, so Southern California, grew up there. Jason and I, the guitarist for Stratosphere, we both grew up in the same kind of a wealthy area of Southern California called Palos Verdes. And we're pretty lucky to have like, me especially, just a ton of support from my parents. They're just like, want a studio, want this, want that. And, we could have been like the crazy spoiled rich kids that like drove their car off the cliff like everybody else at that. But we were, instead of like out partying, we were just like at home recording in 10th and 11th grade, and had a just super supported, like, it was pretty incredible that, to have that sort of head start as far as just the gear and the lessons and all that stuff.
And so, from what I understand, did that project come before Stratosphere?
Yes,
And then
definitely.
was this something that you had done when you moved to Seattle?
No, not at all. No, we at the end of a Stratosphere, we moved to Seattle. So if we back up to like what I was just describing, like this upbringing where we had all this, studio and all this place to play and all this gear, we kind of went through the progression. We played like hard rock, then we played like grunge. Then when we heard Bungle, it pretty much changed everything, and instantly, like as if the rest of it had never happened, basically. So we just went into this like homage to Disco Volante mode,
Hmm.
which was like Don Salsa. So that was our sort of evolving band through high school. Was it eventually became that we had like 3 ADATs, so we could record 24 tracks, and we would record like little 20-second snippets and like record 22 tracks, commit to a mix on it, which I would never do now, and then record 22 more, and sometimes do that 3 or 4 times for each like 30-second segment. It took like 3 straight years to make. So that band, it's almost kind of, when you copy another band, it's almost kind of lame. I think when you do it in high school, there's almost something kind of, I don't know what the right word is, like cute about it. Like, oh, these guys are like, doing their little high school homage to Disco Volante. And
Yeah.
I remember when Trey first heard that tape, he's like, this is the only time I've ever heard us be a good influence, like bungle on someone, because we get all these tapes of like this funk metal and a guy trying to sound like Mike Patton, and we didn't try to do any of that stuff. It was more just like the tritone metal riffs mixed with sambas and just all this kind of kooky stuff. It's hard to listen to. It's very abrasive, but it's pretty, I don't know. We listen back now and it's like, it's still a completely insane album, but
Oh yeah, no, I actually was listening to it a bit before the interview, and yeah, I mean, I don't want to be so typical as to reference like Naked City and Bungle, but it's probably
definitely.
even more demented, you know. I mean,
And
just
those
like
were the two things we were really listening to. And we were starting to like follow some of those influences, which is really the way I feel like you learn from Bungle, when you're like, oh, that Italian thing. And you're like, they're referencing all this like Morricone and Bruno Nicolai and Piccioni and all these soundtracks that if you sort of follow what they're pointing to, you really get to like the promised land on some of this like things you can learn from those like 70s foreign recordings and stuff.
Yeah, so can you tell me a little bit about the formation of a Stratosphere? How did you guys all meet? I mean, because you're all just really incredible musicians, and I'm always blown away how such talent can find each other like that. I've always struggled just to find a drummer, you know, let alone an ensemble of musicians. So can you please kind of walk us through that whole history?
Yeah, it was pretty serendipitous in a way and kind of random. So I just decided I didn't want to go to college. I wanted to do music, and my parents probably regret letting me do that. But like I said, they were super cool, and they were like, cool, I guess he's just going to do that. Like, I didn't really have a plan. I didn't really understand like how the world works that much, but Jason, the guitarist, his parents weren't going to say the same thing, and why should they? But so he decided to go to school in UC Santa Cruz. I basically followed him up there. I'm like, hey, might as well just move out and see what happens. And so I followed him up there. Not everyone in Don Salsa did. It was pretty much him and I that made it up there. So he was going to school there, studying music at UC Santa Cruz. And that's where we met some of the other guys that kind of started to trickle into it. And originally started as like, we're going to try to like play some jazz gigs at coffee shops and make $25 kind of thing.
Mm.
So we met, I don't remember which order it was, but the saxophone player, the real tall guy, John Hooley, he was like into jazz, funk, and can kind of play anything. Is one of the best. If you ever listen to those old, Stratosphere, where you hear the sax solo, he's like one of the best soloists I've ever played with. He can, you could say start on C minor and he comes right in on E, and it's like, I mean it, I'm on E, and like it just sounds good. He just has this confidence that he plays with.
Yeah.
So there was him. Tim Baharis, the violinist, was like studying classical music, and he was a little bit more like precise at that time and like had some of that like uptightness of classical, but liked all this other stuff and was like looking to branch out. So it was cool because you could just be like, here's the melody and like some crazy stuff, and he'll just learn it and practice it and could just execute it very well. Then we met the drummer Dave, who I think was in the jazz ensemble up there, but that was the real, I think, thing that pushed it over the edge. Was he was like a huge, primarily a metal fan, and to find drummer that like plays jazz and metal is pretty rare, like to really do both.
Right.
And he's one of those sort of, you're probably the same way, but he's kind of an encyclopedia of like every classic metal style and this beat. Like to this day, I couldn't tell you like, oh, this one's grindcore, like all the subgenre stuff I'm not super good with. He was always like the authority of metal in a Stratosphere, and our guitarist Jason could play it pretty well too, although he sort of needed to be egged on, and Dave was like that force to be like, let's turn it metal, let's add these polyrhythms in. But anyway, we just sort of all got together up there, and rent in Santa Cruz was like insanely expensive. So we were really lucky to take over this like former crack house, like right in the center of town, that was like huge and like in this state of disrepair. But a lot of us lived there for like really low rent prices for like 5 years or so, where we had a rehearsal space. I had my studio in the bedroom. And when I think back, like it never would have happened without a 911 Mission was the address. I think it's worth $1.6 million now, even in its state of being a dump. That's
God.
California for you.
Oh yeah,
Just looking it up.
especially that area, man.
Yeah, so that was sort of it. It was all based on sort of UC Santa Cruz and us coming together there, and most of us just hung around and still live there even after they graduated and stuff. And I never went to school except took some jazz arranging classes over at the community college.
And how would you describe kind of an ordinary process of writing a song with the Stratosphere, or even Don Salsa? Because I think there's the multi-genre approach and just the craziness of both bands.
Right.
How do you write songs generally? Do you ever have a structure, or do you kind of just sit down and start with one riff, or someone comes in with something and you build on that?
It's a hard question. I mean, in those days, so like when I look back at some of the earliest Stratosphere and then Don Salsa, like we were obviously trying to be crazy, like it's trying to be
Right.
nuts. And now I feel like the stuff I'm doing is much more cohesive, where like there's a lot of influences on top of each other, but I'm not trying to be like bossa nova into metal into a tango, like the shock value of all that. I listen back to some of it. I don't really regret it, but it's like it's not something, being a 44-year-old, that I'm going to be sitting there doing. So in the old days, I'd say a lot of it was based on the guitarist Jason Schimmel. Like he's just such a good riff master. Like you and him would just totally, he just sits there and just cranks out these riffs, and some of them are like metal, but he also has all those like minor key stuff and sort of jazzy stuff, and he just has just like incredible vocabulary of voicings. And once he started to get better at jazz, once we moved up to Santa Cruz, that only got better. But a lot of it in Don Salsa was, I don't know how to break it down, but he wrote like at least half of the music, and I would be sitting there like, how do we arrange this, how do we put it together? And I definitely wrote a bunch of the stuff, but in a Stratosphere, he wrote a good number of the songs. John would write some, I would write some of the tunes. Dave would add his beats or whatever. So in those days, it was like we would kind of figure out the arrangements, and what a pain in the butt it is to sort of like, once you have the song, it's like, do we use a click track? Do I try to make it all natural? But then it's really hard to do all the like speed ups and slow downs you might do, which I've gotten better at all that stuff now. Now I know how to like record something and then map my click to the slowdown that I sort of, if I wanted to go da 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 da, like it's so hard to program that unless you just play it and then you sort of move the bar lines around to that, where it sounds much more natural. But anyway, back in those days, we would arrange the song, kind of play the songs. Some of those on the first Strauss record, we played live and then would add more overdubs, add big, tons of more strings and more horns and organs and whatever we wanted to. But we could pretty much play the tunes down in those days. And then as it got later, it was more just this like production thing where you just add the stuff on. These days, though, I don't know exactly how to describe my process. It's weird. I sort of, you might know what I mean by this, but like, I feel like there's certain elements in a song that like subconsciously you already know are going to be there, but you're not sure how to do it. And you just, as the song unfolds and the recording unfolds, I can kind of just latch on to stuff that like maybe I played something on a demo and I'm like, I'm going to be really faithful to what I played as if that was the thing, and pull these rhythms out of there, pull these harmonies out of there. And I just sort of let things, accident notes, like all that kind of stuff, where I just let things sort of emerge. And I'm like, that's what I was going for the whole time, but I didn't even know it. So it's like maybe like finding like an old house that's like all messed up and you're like cleaning it out and like the picture sort of emerges later. I think your mind sort of works like that, where it's just latching onto something and it already knows what is there, but you're trying to sort of bring it to fruition. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
Oh yeah. I mean, it's definitely not a simple subject either. It's interesting how ideas come together. It could be a moment. It could be something that happens to you. It could be, uh, I mean, I've found that even taking time away from music and coming back, I've had some of my best songs come out of nowhere, riffs or anything.
yeah,
Just taking, not even looking at a guitar for weeks. But yeah, it's
I
interesting
do try
hearing.
to like, have a really clear one thing that haunted me from the past is like not knowing what you want as far as, I mean, you hear like how many different instruments we have. It doesn't really sound like a band that often because there's so many like sections of extra things that are not part of the core band, whether it's like string sections or horn sections or organs and keyboards or whatever. But I try to now have a really clear idea of what I want the instrumentation of the song to be. Like, who's got the melodies? Are they switching off back and forth? Who's got the comping kind of parts? Just so I know like what the vibe is. I feel like the more stuff like that you settle ahead of time, like obviously you can't do anything until your arrangement's done. Like you have to make sure, am I really happy with this arrangement? I hate going back like 2 months later and be like, can we add an extra part here? Like I can do all that, but to me as the like producer and editor, I find that stuff really annoying. I like to sort of, what's the tempo? Where are the transitions? What are the slowdowns? Here's our form. Once you have a form, lock it in, and then you can kind of really go to town on that arrangement. And, you know, like I said, I could make another part, but I kind of like don't like to go there once I get a basic form down. You know, as far as like what's playing on top of that form, sky's the limit, but just kind of lock it in, make sure your tempo's right, just so you can really start recording. I don't like to have to stretch audio if, let's make it faster and things like that. Like, so to me, that stuff helps. And then that sort of subconscious unknown element, I feel, sort of emerges once you have a solid foundation with which to work.
Yeah, for sure. What are you up to now? I know, so you have this new band, High Castle Tele Orchestra. Did I say that right?
Yeah. I think it would either be tele or tele orchestra. I mean, it's not a word that people use very often. So I've said tele orchestra, but then I hear it and I'm like, maybe it's tele orchestra. It's a cool little project. So like, long story short, Stratosphere broke up after moving to Seattle. We were finally like in Santa Cruz so long, we were like wanting a bigger pond, but we didn't even know like what. It was just like, just do it. It's kind of a risky move because we were so comfortable in Santa Cruz and we didn't last more than a year there. But my wife had gotten pregnant. I thought I never wanted kids. I just kind of went with it. So cool. She's pregnant and it's kind of over. Like I need to figure out, I didn't know what I was going to do. Like she's from Montreal. So we're like, let's go to Montreal and have the baby, and then moved to Los Angeles eventually. And eventually I just went into nursing school, but just because I was like, I need something stable, and didn't record anything. I still like played a little bit, but I wasn't doing any serious recording between like 2008 and then 2017. You know, we were in, I got my nursing degree in LA, and then I was like, dude, are we like stuck in LA for the rest of my life? And just on a whim, I don't know how I convinced my wife, but I'm like, let's move to Colorado. And we'd bought this like crappy little house in LA, and then it had gained all this equity or whatever. So we were able to put like a decent down payment on something that cost, you know, a quarter, even less of the price. That's gone way up now, but like we were really lucky to get into like sort of the north side of Denver out in the suburbs. But that allowed me, because I have like a finished basement down here, I could do stuff at all hours, and people are sleeping in the top level of the house. So it's like there's a whole story in between us. But anyway, that sort of, finally I was like, I don't know, I was like kind of paralyzed. I was like, I can record again. And then like, what do I do? So I ended up finishing the ISS record, which is totally different than any of this other music, because it's more based on doo-wop and Beach Boys and 60s pop. And that's, you know, a sort of side of me that I've always had, is like this kind of separated thing. But I had written an album, like a full record. So it took me like a good 2 years to make that, you know, that record here. But then that I finished that, and I'm like, okay, now maybe I need to go back to making, you know, the more, I don't know what to call it, progressive music, avant-garde music, whatever it was I was used to making. So the pandemic hit, and it's not like it affected me that much, because I'm just still here in my basement and like whatever, but it made me realize like no one's playing live. So like I could reach out to some of these people I've, you know, been lucky enough to meet or know over the years, and be like, why not make like a little super band, and I'll produce it. I met this guitar player online, Chris Bogan, who lives in Louisiana. He's the guitarist of the group, and him and I have become sort of like the day-to-day producers, where we're like bouncing stuff all day off each other and just all the time. And the other guys are, we got Steen Karstensen, who's the accordion player from Farmer's Market, and just a absolute wizard, multi-instrumental virtuoso, probably one of the best musicians I've ever seen. We were lucky enough to tour with them in the Stratosphere in the early 2000s. And I kind of equate it to Rocky IV, when the Russian comes and beats Apollo to death. That's what it felt like opening for those guys, because they were like the best musicians that I've ever seen in my life. Like we're like this California, like pseudo Eastern European gypsy. They had actually like studied Bulgarian music like to the T and played like authentic. So it was a great tour. It was a little intimidating, but they were super nice and taught us stuff. But eventually I was like, man, why don't I get that guy? I know him. And so all I had to really do is figure out which tunes we were going to play and sort of curate, it's a lot of it's original, but then I don't mind taking like an old, like, whether it's like a Kurt Weill show tune and be like, you know what, we don't need like the singing kind of melodramatic opera style singing. I'll just use the violins and accordions, and then we'll have all those sort of rich chord changes. And then I'll turn it from 4/4 into like 11/8 or something to just kind of make it this sort of groovy odd time thing. But anyway, I'll get a form down and then I'll send it, to Steon. And then we've got Bear McKinnon from Bungle, who lives in Australia. I'll send it to him. Timba's living in France now. So I'll send it to all them while Chris and I are just kind of plugging away at all the little details, day by day. And then those guys just like send it back. Like Steon plays it, and he's the kind that's like one take and it's like the craziest thing you've ever heard in your life. And Timba can do all this like really amazing string arranging stuff that he's only gotten like much better at since A Stratosphere ended. Like he's really sort of come into his own as a writer, and Bear is a really, really good writer too. And then to finish it off, I was like, let's just get Dave, the original Stratosphere drummer, and like, we'll just call this thing a band. And that's sort of how it worked. And it's really, really awesome, except it's just taking a while to finish the record. That's the problem. And like, we have lives, my wife, kids. I can't take too much away. If I stay up all night, like every night I have off, then I'm like sleeping all the next day. So I'm always pushing it to the limit of like, how many hours can I get out of this? But I think we're about 3 months from maybe finishing the first record, 2 or 3 months. And we should be able to focus on the like release of it and how that's going to all go.
Yeah. How are you planning on releasing it? How do you feel about the current climate of the music business and the internet? And of course, the last couple of years have been crazy, and so with all your experience, not only as a studio musician, but playing live as well, like, how do you feel right now? What are you excited about, and what are you kind of down about with the current climate of the music business?
I mean, it's a hard question, right? You know all the pitfalls of it, that you don't make any money off recordings unless you sell 50, 100,000, whatever. Like if you're on a small label, maybe if you sold 100,000, you'd be like, cool, I have enough to live for a year or something like that. But I've never really made money off recordings. You get a check for a couple $100 here and there. I've never depended on it. It's a shame, but it's the era we live on. Who knew when the internet started and YouTube and all this stuff, or even the download stuff, but like, it seems so cool, and it still is for promoting, but like, it made music not something people are actually excited about. Like, you remember the feeling of like, I'm going to the record store to buy this record. And like, it was almost like the Xbox of the day was like going to get a record. Now I kind of feel like people are not that excited about music. Like, the internet does help you connect with some of the people that still are, but like, I talk to like the general public. It's like, when's the last time you bought a record? And they're like, I don't buy records anymore. Like, you just go to YouTube or Spotify or whatever. And so I'm not looking to make a living from it at this point. So I'm okay with it being what it is, but it is a shame what a lamentable state it is if you were having to depend on this for some kind of career. It's pathetic. It's like, music at its best is the high art, where it's like the meeting ground between, the arts and the sciences. Truly, it's like considered that by the ancients, and maybe not the kind of music we have in this era, but like, music at its best, that's what it is. It's the way the universe expresses itself in an infinite variety of ways. So like, I think music now is like, it's always sort of a reflection of culture, right? Like, you listen to this terrible music on the radio, and it actually makes me angry usually when I hear this like techno pop. But then I think about it and I'm kind of like, this is kind of just like the culture that we live in, like all the general people and like what people are like, and the superficialness of our current culture. This music actually sounds to me exactly like that. So in my head, I can reconcile it, that music is always sort of a reflection of what's actually going on. And sure, there's like nooks and crannies of some of this more interesting music, but you look at the trends of like popular music, like, if the Beatles came out today, would they be a hit? I don't think so.
Yeah, there's so much competition too, and especially if the internet has made it really. I actually think Mike Patton said this once, but he's in an interview, but he said how the internet is great because you can have an audience immediately, by posting a song or a video, or having a MySpace page or whatever. But the downside of that is pretty much any jerk or dildo can do the same thing, and then you got that many more people, in that whole barrel that you're kind of like, and yeah, I hear
It's a
you. I
sad
agree with
state.
everything you said. Yeah.
Yeah. It's freeing that I don't have to depend on that for something, but without getting too much into it, like I have started to come back around, like maybe there is something I could carve out for myself. So I am like sort of in the background. Basically the plan is after we release this record, like we're not going to tour. We're not going to, like, we're never going to tour. Like even if there wasn't a pandemonium or a pandemic or whatever, I don't think we'd be touring anyway. I don't think that would be in the cards for this band. Chris and I are both like family guys and whatever it may be, but now especially with like all the difficulty of international travel and all that, the restrictions, we'll never tour. So my idea is that like, I have all of these different weird sort of branches of knowledge that I've like, kind of like I was telling you before, that I've just like studied on my own, and I've studied this on my own. And then when I put it all together, it's like my sort of, it's everything I know. It seems normal to me, but like you step back and you're like, oh, doo-wop meets Morricone meets Romanian gypsy. Like it doesn't make any sense like to do all this stuff. So I'm having an idea that I'm going to start like a online music conservatory that really breaks down these different branches of like not only the songwriting and how I arrange it, and I'll give people insights into what my file looks like and how I started, but like I'm not going to get into like here's a C and learn this. I'm not going to get into like the very fundamentals, although there will be some really basic stuff like if you start at the beginning of like chord progressions, like we'll definitely start at like 1 and there it is, C major, it's 1. Now you learn the next chord progression, 1-5, C to G7, and so there'll be like 4 levels all the way up to like Steely Dan, Beach Boys, crazy reharmonization type of stuff, and then sort of everything in between. So like I kind of feel like even the intermediate and beginning people might be able to look at some of those other lessons and just be like, dude, what's a D7 sharp 9 sharp 11, whatever, that's cool. And maybe you didn't get anything but that lesson, but it kind of got some ideas into your head. But anyway, I'm going to be breaking down production stuff, whether it's like the way I set up my plugins or arrange the tunes or the chord progressions or reharmonizations, and then even some branches of like music appreciation stuff. So like you don't even have to be a musician. Like of all this, like I've been privy to like some of my buddies are like some of the best music collectors in the world, like would blow your mind, like people that spend their years in different countries just collecting thousands of things, coming home and compiling them. Like I have this buddy, Alan Bishop, who runs this label. He used to be based in Seattle, but I think he lives in Egypt now. He runs this label, Sublime Frequencies. I don't know if you ever heard it, but he just goes to different countries. And instead of being like, we're from Cambridge University and here to record your tribe, he just goes and like is with the people and just like hangs and like dumpster dives and cassettes, shortwave radio recording, goes out into the bush and pays some tribes, and he comes home and turns it all into a collage of one CD. Like
Wow.
it is incredible. It's like avant-garde ethnomusicology. But anyway, there will be a branch of just like some of these thousands of obscure recordings that a lot of them you couldn't even find on YouTube or anything, where I'll use it as examples of like, listen to the way they're using this string part here, and then this vibraphone comes in, because the way they produced in the 60s and 70s, where they just had to get the musician in the room and there was no faking it or cutting it up in Pro Tools or anything. It's just the caliber of musician they were using, not only in the US on all the like pop tunes of the day, where the Wrecking Crew that played for like Phil Spector and Brian Wilson, and were just like making hundreds of thousands of dollars just playing music, back in the day when you could really be a musician. They were doing the same thing in Italy, Germany, all around the world. There was just like the best musicians, like pre-MIDI, just like laying down tracks. And so some of the production stuff, you just listen to one tune and you get this idea. You're like, I'm going to use a conga just like that. And listen to that, how much reverb they're putting on that conga. How the hell are they getting away with that? But it sounds awesome. So you find a way, like go in and do your conga and you're like, it sounds so digital and sterile. Then I'll slam it over here to my cassette deck and just have the needles just buried, fly it back into the computer. There's a little tape drift, so you cut it in a few spots and you're like, that sounds much better. And like, just things like that kind of like inspire you to go a certain direction with your instrumentation or something like that. So there's going to be all these branches, and I'll have it like, I haven't figured out the structure yet, but I'm going to basically be like, it's $5 a month. and you decide to pay more if you feel you're getting more out of the class. Like if if you want me to be your actual teacher and that's how much you're getting out of this, then like pay $20 a month or whatever it is. But I'm going to see, it's worked for me very well on Kickstarter to be like, pay what you want. So if it totally doesn't work and even people that are, taking every single lesson still only want to pay $5, maybe I would have tiers, but I'm kind of hoping to avoid the whole like Patreon tiers. I'm going to send these people this, but I'll send these people this. I kind of just want to have it available if that ends up working out. So
Is
that
this
to me
something?
would,
Oh, sorry.
sorry. Just let me finish finish my thought. That would be, I think, the equivalent of like touring for our band, was just giving this glimpse into the entire process. And I can use the files I'm currently working on. So I can, a lot of times my lesson will just be like screen sharing what I'm doing. I'm going to set up the drum bus and how do I set up the master bus? And here we're going to get a strings, whatever I'm doing, so that I can be efficient with my time of like just recording what I'm actually doing and producing content with that.
Yeah. Is this something that you would release on your website or on another website or some kind of app?
Yeah, it would be like a Patreon kind of thing. There's some much lower cost alternatives, and I don't know if they're like, Patreon may be worth it to pay that like 8% or whatever they take because there's more people. But there's things like Ko-fi, which we might use, KOFI, which is like they take no money. You can get the gold, and it's $6 a month flat. And then I would use an external hosting site. So my plan would be I would upload partial lessons to YouTube, basically trying to become like the avant-garde Rick Beato type of thing. So I would release partial lessons to YouTube that were kind of teasers over to fully subscribing. And then there would be private links for the people that are actually subscribed, hosted on something like a Vimeo or something like that, where you could control a little better than YouTube for just hosting.
Yeah, no, I think it sounds like a great idea. And
There would also be like I'd have like the PDF sheets, whether we're studying a chord progression, there'd be like content with it. And eventually I was telling Chris, he like teaches online classes and like cybersecurity and stuff. Eventually we like actual well laid out courses would emerge. But if I were to sit here and try to write the well laid out courses for all 7 of those subjects, like it would take me years. So I'm content to like be that same thing as before, dusting off the old farmhouse and seeing if we can like have a picture emerge at some point. And in the meantime, you're paying 5 or 10 or 15 or $20 a month, whatever you think value you're getting out of the class. And, if I could, Rick Beato's making like 50 grand a month off YouTube ads. I don't think I could get there because my subject matter is kind of esoteric. But it's kind of like streams on Spotify, right? I have to get like 10,000 and they're going to pay me like $5. Like YouTube, I feel like could be something that I get people's attention, but I don't want my whole videos to be on there. I just want them to point over to the online thing where they can subscribe. And if I could get, 1,000 people to over a couple years to pay $10 on average a month, or 2,000, but it could easily turn into something if I really sort of stuck to it. But it's hard to tell unless you just go do it. And it's like overwhelming coming up with the content, because I'm just sitting there all day, all night, where like things come into my head. Oh, this is going to be a lesson. This is going to be a lesson. Then the next week I've like forgotten what I even thought. I'm like, I need to write all this stuff down, start just coming up with the lessons. But I can't really do any of that until I finish the High Castle record, because then I'm like splitting my time, that's just already limited anyway. So that's sort of the plan for the release.
Do you guys have a rough timeline or estimation of the release?
So it'll be done. We better not be working on this by January 1st is really what's in my head. So we're going to release it on this label in Australia called Art as Catharsis, which seems to run a pretty good operation there and is a little bit out of our sort of like incestuous circle of like the Zorn Bungle. I don't know. There's some cool labels and all that stuff, but these guys in Australia have been running this little operation that's seems like it's just generally like open-minded music. There's like a slightly like world music, which I hate that term, but bent to it, but like experimental stuff kind of around it and noise and things like that. And it's kind of a good little fit. So we'll see how that goes with all the sort of distribution and whatever, they already have available. It won't be like some overnight thing, but we kind of feel like we really need to market digitally well, which is not something I'm very good at, as far as like which parameters of the Facebook ad do I click and like which audience. I don't know. The Lachlan who runs the label is really good at that. So hopefully.
Yeah, I mean that's basically the label's job.
Yeah.
It's so much work. I've done the ad thing once or twice, and it was a disaster. It was like I don't think I made one album sell on it, and they kept like Facebook kept charging me over and over. Like I'm like, dude, the ad was over a week ago. Why you guys, And it's weird, but I don't know. It seems to work for some people, and I there's definitely it's sad that now we have to like watch 3 ads just to see any video on YouTube, and they don't even pay the artist. That's
No.
like for them now,
Yeah, it's not whoever's like that. It was like someone else is getting paid for that. Yeah. It's I don't even understand it, but I'm trying to make a push to like depend on it less. Even ran an ad last week that's actually very successful. It was like, I'll give you free music if you sign up for my email list. That's it. Like, and it's actually been very successful. I think I've had like 250 new email addresses come up from an ad that I think I paid $40 for 2 different ads. I'm like, to get an email address is kind of worth the cost of, worth the price of admission. But we've had some dud ads as well, and a couple that have been pretty successful. So there is, I think, a way to tweak those algorithms, but it's just a question of learning it and kind of another skill that, like, not necessarily looking to be like a marketing genius, but kind of necessary, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah, especially with it's just so much now. It was one thing to have like MySpace and YouTube, right? Those were probably the best days in my opinion. But then now it's like you got Facebook, which is horrible in my opinion for business pages and band pages. I don't know how
Unless
you
you
feel
pay. Yeah. Oh yeah. They don't even, it doesn't even reach like, yeah. And then there's all
doesn't
the
even
Instagram,
reach.
which I don't even understand. I don't have a Twitter. Like I can't keep, am I supposed to have a TikTok? Like I can't keep track of all this stuff.
Yeah, yeah, man. This like TikTok and all these apps, and I'm just like, dude, how many more do we need? And then I actually got a royalty statement from TikTok. All these thousands of plays. I didn't even know my albums were on there, but it was like 0 cents. When I reached out to my publishing, I'm like, what's going on with that? And they never responded. And then I researched it, and from what I know, it's like they will only pay you like it's probably just a cent anyway of a stream, but like just for if it's a video, not necessarily the song or whatever. So I was like, man, I give up. Like there's only so much you could worry about in terms of that stuff, and it's just the end of the day you have to. I had this conversation yesterday with another guest, and he said like sometimes you just have to stop with all this and just focus on why you're doing this, and it's for music. You're playing music and having fun, and you want to express yourself, and it's kind of a medicine. And that once you get lost in all the branding and all that, and so that's kind of why labels have a place. But unfortunately, labels have given up. Just because of all the downloading and the streaming and.
They don't make
Yes.
much if you're not touring. And we were never much a tour. Like a Stratosphere would be like 2.5 years of recording. Then we go on like a 1-month tour, like US, Toronto, Montreal, and just do like a big loop and come back through Texas and then come back to California. It was never enough to like, the bands, like when you got buddies that are like doing okay on tour and they're like out 9 months a year and just the grind. Like that was never going to be us. Like, I've slept on. We used to save money by sleeping on people's floors. I've slept under dishwashers and all kinds of stuff. And it was fun because you got to like meet people and like see where they live. But it's like as you're getting older, you're not really looking to sleep on people's kitchen floors and stuff.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And
You
it
can
costs
handle
all the money, the hotels and the food and all that stuff. And we would do like some of that stuff like on our DVDs with all the big productions. Like we would lose money because we're like, let's bring a full like our own lighting system and 2 guys to run it, and like just kind of ideas that weren't great as far as like finances, but we were able to come up with a cool product because we recorded it.
I wanted to ask you too. Some stuff in I guess the Stratosphere era, but you did tour with Secret Chiefs 3, or was that the band toured with them, or you personally were in the band, or?
Yeah, so I think that was our first tour. So after we came out with our first record on Mimicry, which is Trey Spruance's label that he had started from Secret Chiefs 3. So then we got invited by them to for Stratosphere to open. Then he was just kind of like, well, I can use some of you guys to do double duty. I played bass. Some of the other guys would come out, like Timbo played violin, and some of the other guys would play as needed, and kind of just do the sort of incestuous, double duty there, which was super fun. So that's what got us like sort of a name. Like, we sold a whole bunch of CDs that tour. And yeah, that's what got us like a tiny little name in that little bungle scene, was going on that tour, basically.
Let's see here. Just one last question. I know you mentioned you were a nurse. How did you get into that? And what drove you into that side profession?
It's funny because they ask you that question in nursing school, and they go around the room like on day one or something, and everyone feels this pressure to be like, because I'm a good person and I just want to help people. I don't know. After I was kind of a little lost after like I quit after I left the Stratosphere, and the band just kind of dissolved, and I went to Canada for a year, had my kid, and then I was like, I'm not going to learn to speak French. I don't know what to do. But I didn't really know what to do with my life because I had been kind of skating by, doing some odd things here and there, but none of that was going to really work for being like a family life. So we moved back in with my parents in LA. I didn't really know what I was going to do. And I remember we were like sitting on the balcony one night. My wife kind of looks at me and is like, if in 5 years you don't have like some kind of like halfway decent job, she's like, I don't think I'm going to stick around. And I was like, sometimes you need a motivation like that. You can take it and get all offended and be like, screw you, I'm going to do what I want. But like, it's a weird thing, just supporting yourself in the physical world. Like even like before modern times, whether it was like the labor of collecting food or whatever, or just in this case, like doing jobs you may or may not want to do. Like my whole family was in the medical profession. My dad was a ER doc. My mom was a nurse, but she didn't really work after she had us. So there's that. I was always coming at health from a more holistic angle. Like I rarely seek medical care, and I still am kind of like that. But ER is kind of fun. You see some crazy stuff. You hopefully see some people that really need to be there, which is maybe 15 or 20% of them. But it's I work 3 days a week. I have 12-hour shifts. So I'm off for 4 days. It's a good schedule. I do graveyards. It's a good thing to be able to have like enough time to do this other stuff and still time to be with my family, and, pays more than I would be able to make, doing anything related to music. So it's,
that's cool.
Yeah, it's like all that to say, like it's not like, oh, that was my passion, blah blah blah, and a lot of things that happen in the medical industry is not really I'm like, I wouldn't take these 20 meds that this person's been prescribed or something. Like I just am not like that. But I can go in there, do my job, and go home, and hopefully have seen a couple people that really needed to be there and were in some kind of, legitimate emergency, traumas and things like that, and emergency surgeries or whatever. So it's an interesting profession. It's a bit of a grind, but it's like human at least, or I'm not like at some cubicle or something like that, which I don't think I would do too well at. Like seeing people like on their worst day, or having a psychiatric crisis, or getting beat up by a schizophrenic guy who escaped his room or something. Like, I don't know, all that stuff just makes it a little more interesting, where you're just kind of like, I don't know what's going to happen today, but
yeah. Cool, man. Well, it's good to meet you and get to know a little bit about your history and your current endeavors and such. I have timsmolens.com. That's your main site. I have youtube.com/user, or is it is youtube.com? Your name on there is Enlightened Barbarian. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think I came up with that way before I like was doing any of the stuff. So I was like,
I don't know. I just figured I'd plug that because I know some people just don't subscribe to people's YouTube channels and they neglect it. So where else can we find you? Facebook. Are you on Instagram? Do you have any other sites you'd like to plug?
High Castle has an Instagram. I still don't even know how to use Instagram. I keep asking people like, what am I supposed to do? I don't get it. Like I don't get it. HighCastleTeleOrchestra.com is probably the main one, I guess. And there's like email lists there you could sign up for, but there's some music there we have already, but obviously the full length release is forthcoming in early 2022. So that's really the big thing to look for. And Facebook, where we have High Castle Teleorchestra groups and things like that.
Cool, Tim. Hey, man, I appreciate it. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me on, man. It was fun. We've been chatting for a long time, so it's cool to finally actually like sort of meet you.
Definitely, man. Take care, man.
Yeah, you too.